you know, I'm just excited to be able to chat with him. He's got a PhD in applied math from the University of Maryland, which is where I first met him. He did a bunch of work on weather prediction that I talk about in some of the classes that I teach here at UVM. He's been at the forefront of data science pretty much ever since he graduated from Maryland, and has had positions at LinkedIn and PayPal and Skype and eBay. And in fact, when he was at LinkedIn, this may have been the first time I saw a big picture of a network, because he had made a visualization of all the different fields that people work in that he was connected to. And some of you may remember seeing that when it first came out. It was pretty shocking and inspiring to see at the time. And it's, you know, it's pretty cool to be able to chat with him today. He's working now for Devoted Health after having spent time working for Obama as the Chief Data Scientist of the United States, which is a pretty cool title, one that didn't exist before he filled that role, and has, you know, basically for the last 20 years been working to bring legitimate science, mathematics, statistics, ethics into industry. And it's just a really, it's obviously a critical time to be doing that, and to do it in a way that honors, you know, what it is that we feel our principles are as human beings. And so he's demonstrated a leadership capacity in that regard, and I'm hopeful that he can talk a little bit about that today. Certainly there's forces, monetary forces working the other direction. And then I also wanted to say, DJ, you may not remember this, but you hosted me when I came to visit Maryland when I was a senior in college and looking at grad schools. And so that was pretty cool. And then, you know, in my first year, I really struggled. For the students on the call in grad school, I really struggled in my first year. And DJ was a big part of me just feeling like, oh, there's a path forward that I can see through this and actually change my degree, you know, because he was involved in this new degree in scientific computing and applied math. And so thanks for that, DJ. I know you have an interesting career trajectory to talk about yourself. So, you know, I'm just really excited to have a chat with you here today, and I'll let you say a few things to start, but we got a bunch of bright people on the line who want to ask you questions too. So, so thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's apologies we don't get to hang out in person. Chris, you forgot the most important thing. We used to slay it on the basketball court. We were really good.
I was obviously hoping you would bring that up.
There was nothing better than, you know, like everyone on campus being like, oh, those are the math TAs. And then just
we definitely wore math shirts during those games. That was an important part of it. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. And we were, it was an epic run. So, you know, we can go in all sorts of directions. There's these days I get to work in a whole bunch of novel areas, novel things. I'm super fortunate. You know, some of that is in the policy area. Some of that is more in the modeling areas. Some of it's more in the traditional data areas, architecture, healthcare. I spent about 15 weeks helping drive California's response on COVID up in Sacramento. We're a population of about 40 million people. And we were the first to lead with a stay-at-home order for a nation, and really worked across the broader United States with governors and mayors to try to help people understand why that's so important. That includes taking a model that was really being run out of Johns Hopkins University. That was taking, you know, multiple days to run. It was a pretty solid model, but didn't have the ability to really get you to that granularity that you need to really make policy decisions. And what is it required to also figure out, you know, the rights and wrongs of scenarios as you're trying to get your head wrapped around a world with such imperfect information. This is a time when we barely had any information out of Italy. We had information only off, really off one of the cruise ships, and debatable information out of Wuhan. We just didn't know, you know, there's very early reports. So how do you build a model with that to decide which is the 9th largest economy in the world, and what happens if you make certain choices? Those have material impacts, not just to the population here in California, but globally as a result. And you know, we were able to move that model, and we got it to run down into 30 minutes using a lot of expertise from Amazon and other friends and engineering. And so we can talk about some of the dimension that's required to how do you do those things? Like, how do you pull that off? A lot of times I think we kind of sit there in our classic academic environments and we try to really say, okay, we're trying to be very, very, not only thoughtful, but really intellectually honest with making sure the science is there. But how do we jump to that level that actually pushes it from a policy perspective? How do we actually have impact? Chris, your guys' work on this, on looking at emotion and trying to understand things using these creative ways with Twitter and other things. These are where the puck is going. And so how do we find this hybridized balance between public policy, science, technology, math, all these things? And we're in an incredibly tough challenge right now in the design of these systems. I was part of that cohort of people who designed many of these social network systems and some of the virality measures and how do we, some of these things that we're thinking of that time. So there's a whole slew of turf that we could talk about, including precision medicine or life in the White House. Happy to go into any and all directions because there's a bunch of really interesting things that are taking place in the world literally as we speak.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And maybe I'll start it before opening it up to other people by saying that I think it would be really helpful for the students on the call. Most of them won't go into academia. To hear you talk about what the benefits are, what the best things are about working for government and industry, and what the challenges that you face are. What things can a person who's sitting in a numerical analysis class this fall or learning about chaos theory, what can they take from those environments, and what's going to be different about working in industry or government?
Yeah, the first thing I think is the single best training that you can have in the world. I think is one solid part mathematics. Honestly, it gives you formulation how to think. And the thing that is really, that I found, at least with studying math, was that it teaches you how to learn. It teaches you how to create rubrics. It teaches you how to break problems up into ways that are solvable. And it also allows you to really get to the nitty-gritty details. It gets you into the nuances. And once you've got that, it allows you to take and expand that work into so many different directions. One of the equally important things is that you always have to take math and the sciences in particular and tie it to the humanities. There's some dimension that you have to make richer with the humanities. It could be art, it could be theater, it could be literature, it could be all sorts of directions. But you have to find some way to ground it with the humanities. When you do that, you get a different level of richness. Another thing is, I think in academia, we often think of not going into research as failure. And I think that's an incredibly flawed approach to think about the world. I think about the people that I interact with who, all sorts of time, and it comes out like, they're like, oh, I'm a mathematician too, or I did this and I love math and I do these things. Happens all the place at time. And the thing is when you're able to take your skills and populate it in other places, that's when really material, powerful things start to take place. New ideas get to be fostered and things come together. We forget like the t-tests and that comes out of Guinness. And the stories of where math kind of really gets some of this special ideas, they're brought forward in different environments. And we have to figure out, how do we kind of not just stay concentrated in one place, which is oftentimes a department with closed doors where we're working just at a desk, and rather working across a team, working across an industry, pushing across. Whether you call it data science or mathematics, who cares? Like, honestly, who really cares? As long as you have the ability to take your skills, your passion, and align it with a problem that has material impact. Like when you have that ability, really radical things can happen.
It seems to me that that's something that data science has brought to the undergraduate curriculum now that hasn't really been there with math, I think. You know, there's so many classes you have to take in math before you feel like you've gotten to the place where, oh, I could see how this is useful. But with the data science curriculum now, it happens much sooner. And maybe that's, you know, a way to recruit different people into the fore.
Yeah, I think data science, you know, maybe is it useful to kind of go through a little bit of the background how we came up with the title?
Sure, that'd be great.
You know, part of this is what I think was fascinating is that, you know, Chris and I came from a math department where you had a lot of theoreticians and you had people who were in mathematical physics. You know, Sergei Novikov, Dora was just a couple down from us, and he's doing very complex manifold theory. And then there was people who were doing applied math, which was more on the cryptography side many times. But where were people who were playing with data? Like it kind of felt like we were not even a second-class citizen. We were oftentimes like a third or fourth-class citizen. We didn't really fit into the department. And people were like, oh, are you scientific computing? Or are you just numerical analysis? We're like, well, we do stuff with data. Like we're trying to find insights. And they're like, oh, all right, you're a time series person. Well, we could be more than time series people, right? We could do more than an FFT. Like we got stuff, we got skills, we got insights. And, you know, like people were stuck in this very regimented world. And, you know, one of the things that I think was definitely true for Chris and I was we're working on meteorology data. You know, meteorology data was just really getting accessible online. And so, you know, I certainly remember my second year of grad school getting access to both basically finding a hole in the security of the math department and taking over all the machines at night and then downloading all this data and basically doing extract, transform, loading, ETLs, and a bunch of numerical processing to just create imagery, just to create an idea, to get my head wrapped around like, what is this data? And just trying to visualize it. And visualization platforms were just really finally being able to run in non-terrible time. Like it might take 5 minutes. And we had finally a color printer and we're like, what? A color printer, we can make these work. And it was like, it didn't take like 10 minutes to make an image. And you know, like that processing, suddenly people were like, wait a second, that you're doing something that's kind of in between, and people weren't sure how to interpret it. But the value proposition that we were able to make and say, hey, look, this is going to directly improve a weather forecast that might impact multiple billions of people, made people sit up, made people start paying attention. You know, when I got to Silicon Valley after doing my first stint in government, you know, people in the Valley here at all the classic places like Yahoo, Google, they also were like, yeah, this data thing, it's okay. Yeah, we think there's promise, but we're not sure what to do with it. Only when I finally got hired at eBay and I was like, hey, what if we take this data and put it together? And look, it's going to help us figure out all the bad people who are trying to take advantage of other users. And people were like, you can do such things? I was like, yes, like it's not very hard. And then the material impact was direct. The ability for the fraud levels just dropped. And it wasn't, we're not talking like rocket science. What we're talking about is a creative use of data and then the application of algorithms on top of that. You didn't need crazy statistics or other things. Just the power was using data that was existing in novel ways. When we got to, at that point, Reid Hoffman, who is the founder of LinkedIn, him and I had become quite good friends at that point. LinkedIn had kind of stalled a little bit. And we're thinking like, where do we need to take this company? We realized that it's about data. The play is about data and not just using people's data in a, benefiting from it. It was taking data and building and turning it into a product that they would then benefit from. They would actually get the disproportionate benefit. The user would get benefit from. And that feedback cycle was really what we were realizing, like, this is why we're here. This is what we're trying to do. And then the reason why the title data scientist came about was literally Jeff Hammerbacher, who was running the data team at Facebook, and I was running at LinkedIn. We didn't know what to call ourselves. We had no idea what to call ourselves. And when we went through the list, you know, the last thing that we kind of came up with was data scientists. Like a statistician, you know, was too narrow. Analysts fell to Wall Street. You know, like we couldn't find research scientists. The rest of the teams wouldn't take you seriously. They thought you were just doing some experiment. So when we had that, we thought, first thing we're like, that seems redundant. Data scientists, like, don't scientists use data? But what the trick was, we actually, Monica Rogati had this idea. She posted every job that we were posting on LinkedIn for data and put them all, like analyst, statistician, she posted all of them. And everyone that applied that we really interviewed and then hired, they all applied to the data scientist one. And so we stuck with it. And the thing that's interesting is, why is that taken off? Why is it actually becomes something there? Because I think what we've realized is two pieces. One, for those of us that care about data, it's a great way to get our head around understanding the world. Same thing that Galileo, Copernicus, the Mayans, the Aztecs, you know, the Mesopotamia, all people have been doing for, you know, hundreds of years, that we're rediscovering it. The second reason is the rest of the world doesn't know what the hell a data scientist is. And so one of the things as students and all of us just in general have to understand, everyone is trying to put you in a box. One box is academic. You're just an academic. Why? You have no business talking to us about how the policy should work or how to run a company, because you're an academic, right? Another one is, sorry, you're a woman. Another one might be, oh, you know, the color of your skin. Another one might be, oh, you're only an engineer. Another one is, you're only a designer. Like, there's all these boxes that people want to put around you. When you're a data scientist, everyone's like, I don't know, they work with data and they're smart. I hear they're smart. So good thing they're in the room. But when you're in the room and you have context, you can then take your skills and tie that with the application. And that's what actually makes good problem solving like real. And that because of that ambiguity, that's allowed us to really achieve a different level of success and provide the value proposition. And the thing I would tell all of you is, do not let anyone put you in a box, because they're going to try. They're always trying. That's how we are. That's a flaw of us with humans and this bias. So don't let them do it to you.
Love it. Other questions?
Laurent, do you want to go?
Yeah, I have one, because you touched on it. You talked about making pictures and how you present yourself. And one of the things I'm the most curious about, because I have no real experience outside of academia, is how you communicate with other people when you know, we all know the language of scientific figures, and that works well, but even like the words that you use, like what has been your experience learning a new language when going into industry?
Yeah. So such a great question. So I think Chris and I got super lucky. You know, our advisors, you know, and especially in the Maryland Chaos Group, you know, you had to present twice to twice as students before you presented to the faculty. And we were brutal on each other in a constructive way. We weren't jerks to each other, but we were brutal in, like, you know, the color of the font, the type. This is like we're writing on transparency notes. Like it was like epic. And you're like, oh, I gotta redo my transparencies now because Chris just told me my handwriting sucks. And like we went to this very fine detail of like even how you sounded, like your pitch, your tone, and you know, one of the greatest things that happened in one of our seminars like this, I don't know if Chris remembers, we had one of our really fantastic professors say, you know, I just want you to know that I haven't understood a single thing you've said. Not to say it's wrong, I just haven't understood anything you said. And it was like one of these quintessential moments of like, everyone else is like, yeah, me too. and it just highlights, like, we think we're communicating, but we're not. Like, what is communication? Communication is I say something, Your ability to say it back to me and me to say yes or no, like you've got it. Like if we hold that to the bar, like would somebody be able to repeat it back? That's critical. And so oftentimes we have to find, how do we engage? What is that level of engagement? You know, the three things that I teach all the data people that I get to work with is, you know, the first two, which are the classic communication 101, is what do you want me to take away from this? Like I'm seeing this graph, I'm seeing this thing. What do you want me to take away with it? Two, what action do you want me to take? Do you want me to write it down as notes? Do you want me to tweet about it? Do you want me to call a meeting if it's an important graph? Should I, like, what do you want me to do? Most of the time our answer is just nod along. Like we just nod, we don't actually do anything. And then the third one is, how do you want me to feel? And that seems somewhat, you know, uncomfortable as scientists, because we're like, oh no, there's no emotion. But our job is to communicate. And what we have found is when we create dashboards for a company or trying to get people to understand information, the drop shadow, the colors, they all massively matters. What people don't care about is a chart with, you know, 10 lines on it with, you know, upside down triangles and hexagons for different types of charts. And then somebody says, as you can see, and you're like, as I can see what? Like this is like the worst word in any speaking, as you can see. No one sees anything. It's all crap, right? What we want to do is you walk up to the board and you point to it. You point to it and you tell people, like, what I'm trying to explain here is this phenomena. How do you communicate with that extra jump? This even gets even harder when we're operating in this digital world. And those small things, you learn them because you practice. You learn them because you get feedback. If you are giving a practice talk, you should be using that opportunity to get better massively through that talk, because it's your chance. And when you go out and give a practice talk, you know, for a job or anything else, you know, everyone should be like, wow, that person, phenomenal communicator, because that's your one shot. And I can't tell you how much time I go through practicing just for my stuff. And if I'm doing something, I go through massive amounts. I will tell you the amount that President Obama went through practicing his talks, the amount of editing he does on his speech on the car ride over to the State of the Union is not small. And so if someone of his caliber of communication abilities, doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, it's not a political thing. It's about the ability to connect with people. And if you bridge that with your research, and you're seeing this shift is happening in research. More people are doing the Kickstarters. More people are finding ways to engage. The same thing true. If you read an article, what do people read? The abstract. That's it. How are you going to get that next level of reason somebody cares and shares what you have written, what you have spent all this time on, to explain to somebody else why they should care? What would it look like if you made and asked about your research, about your projects, what would it mean to go viral? In the sense that it says somebody is so excited about your work that they are going to share it with more than one person. Because if you ask and you hold yourself to that bar, now you're going to get distribution. And that's actually how you push the scientific method forward. Scientific method isn't just about hypotheses. There's a step missing. It's about advocating and evangelizing your work so others can provide you feedback so that you can then really complete the cycle of the scientific method.
Andrea, I think you're up next.
Thanks. Yeah. Hi. Well, thanks for talking to us today. I had a couple of questions that I kind of rolled into one giant awkward question, so I'll just go for it. But yeah, so so this is kind of coming from my background, which is I got my undergrad in math, and then I went and was a software developer for a couple of years. With the idea is kind of exactly what you said about math, where like people think you're smart. Development companies, they want math people as well because they know that we're smart. And so I went and did that, and then kind of started learning about data science. But what I also found was there is a lot of confusion because it's kind of this new buzzword with data engineering. And if you just go ahead and go down that route, which I found a lot of people doing, and I almost went down, it was kind of just like building the pipeline for someone else to do the cool stuff. So here I am back in this department and school, but without wanting to kind of have that stay in that academia box or like be stuck in that box, which I hate that we're calling it a box, but echoing what you said, like, what are your thoughts on kind of where to plug yourself in to maximize combine, being hands-on, but also doing the cool stuff. And then also kind of where your team ultimately can plug in to have that impact at a policy level and not just end up kind of building someone else's software or something like that. So it's like five questions.
No, they're all great. They're super, super great. It's interesting when we were trying to figure this out, like, so the guy who's a chief scientist for LinkedIn now, Igor Pirsek, he was my counterpart on engineering. And we used to always have this joke of like, who's a data scientist, who's an engineer? I mean, Igor has a PhD in statistics. And so we're like, look, are you the data scientist of LinkedIn or am I? Or like, we'd be like, great, there's two of us. That means when we used to joke, like when at these decision tables, we're like, well, we get 2 votes, everyone else gets 1. Because we thought of it as a team approach. And like, where did my team start? Where did his team, like, where are the lines? We thought of them as very blurry. And I think data science and data engineering are still figuring out a lot of this. And my general view is, to put this in context, our teams collectively, whether it was a data scientist, actually a great one is Kafka. The technology, for those who are familiar with Kafka, this is a technology that was really invented at LinkedIn by Jay Krebs, Jun Rao, Neha Narkade, and Chris Rickamini. I hired, Jay was my first engineer. Chris Rickamini started working with me as an intern back at PayPal. Neha Narkade is my cousin, and I hired Jun Rao. And they all were sort of like, are they on the data science team or the data engineering team? I was the executive sponsor because I said, I can't pay these costs for the previous systems that we were using, which was really Splunk at the time. And we needed a different approach. Now, who gets to build it, how to do it? We always thought of it as, what is the team that's needed? And like, who's the best team that we can put together? And then when we did that, we were like, okay, well, we need somebody with this skills, with this skills, with this skills. And that made the problem actually more manageable rather than saying, which organization are you from? We just said, like, what skill sets do we need to solve this problem? And it's more like a, maybe it's an analogy of, saying something like you need different positions on a sports team, or you need different roles in theater, or, pick your favorite analogy. Everyone has something to contribute. And what we're trying to do is put them together. I think these days people love to put you in this lane, and that is one of those boxes. Like, your career path is data engineering, rather than allowing you to float. The best data engineers float. The best data scientists float. Are they doing engineering? Depends on the day. Doing data science? Depends on the hour. And you want to have roles that give you that flexibility, that ability to play. It'd be the same thing as if we're in science and then we said, hey, you know what? We did all the research, but we're not allowed to present it because we need to have a front person that presents it. That seems crazy, right? That's sort of crazy in a company as well. Like, why are we letting somebody else present our work? Same thing is true in policy. And this is one of the most important things that is going to be there in my mind that changes the world. For technologists, for scientists, we cannot be in the back office. if we're in the back office, that's where bad decisions happen. Decisions on climate change that just don't make sense. Decisions on healthcare policy. You look at what's happening with COVID right now and the decision making that makes sense. You're like, how is that possible when we have 181,000 people who are dead now? And we're talking about testing policies out of this? Is there a scientist there? There certainly is not a statistician or an epidemiologist that is really helping drive these decisions. I can tell you that concretely because I've talked to the whole team. And so we need those people in the room when it happens. I'll give you a concrete example. People weren't sure what was going to happen with there was a big oil well that exploded, the Horizon oil well. And people were like, you know what? We can't actually figure out a solution here. There's no solution. It's going to take us months. In the Oval Office, because the Secretary of Energy happened to have a Nobel Prize in physics, he designed the cap for the Horizon disaster in the Oval Office while everyone else was saying there's no solution. We had Secretary of Defense Ash Carter. That was Secretary Steve Chu. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, somebody was talking about how you can't actually design this thing for a jet refueling thing. And Ash Carter, who happens to also be an experimental physicist, was like, have you thought about it this way? And they're like, oh, yeah, good point. When you're in the room and you have those skills, you contribute in a very different way. And that's why these things have to come together this way, is you have to find some way to be in the room. Don't be backbenching. Get at the table. Get at the table, get airtime, and be able to do that, and level up as you're doing that. And then people, like, after a while, people are like, I don't know, whatever her role is. I don't know, she just needs to be in the room so we can actually figure out what to do. That's what you want. And if you're not around people who demand that, you're around the wrong team. Get to a team where you should be, where people value that. Do not waste your time around people that do not value that.
That's great advice. I have a quick question, or it's probably not a quick question, that was a lie. But I was wondering, like, what you think the responsibility of like a professional data scientist is to protecting consumer or subject data. Like, what is our responsibility to be able to sort of have beneficence towards the data subject?
Yeah, it's great, superb question. So in the construction of the role of the chief data scientist, one of the things that I was very fortunate to be able to do was to write the mission statement of that role and what that person is going to be doing forever on out in future administrations. The Trump administration has tried to fill this role, to be clear. They just haven't gotten anybody to take the job yet. I won't put any commentary on top of that, but they agree with this mission statement, which is to responsibly unleash the power of data to benefit all Americans. And the word responsibly was put there very intentionally, because with the idea of just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that is a quintessential aspect of data science. When you see problems where these data science goes off the rails or something happens and you're just like, how did they do that? Like, what the heck? And you kind of look at these things, almost inevitably, it comes down to no one decided to raise their hand and say, I'm not sure. There's no difference from this, by the way, than when you talk to the care team in the surgery room. And Atul Gawande has written a fair amount about this in the Checklist Manifesto, but you see this around airline disasters, ship disasters, is the least empowered person knew that there was a problem and no one said, hold on. No one had a way to stop the line. This is what Toyota actually innovated, and it's called the Andon cord, is that anybody could stop the line. They could pull the thing and everyone has to stop. No one's at blame. It means that somebody's like, hey, there's a problem. And so we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to actually build those systems into place? And many of those aspects do not actually have a process. one of the things for those that are interested is Hillary Mason, Mike Lukides and I wrote a small book on this of data and ethics as our ideas around how do you actually implement these things. There's a ton of work that is very early and around fair, accountable, responsible use of data, but there has to also be a pragmatic approach that is there now, because data, you can't stop doing data science. It's going to keep going. And what are those protections? Biggest ones is that ability to have some kind of stop mechanism, red teaming the data, like putting a team together, grabbing a pizza, maybe if you want some beers, and just kind of being like, look, what could all the things that could go wrong are? And you just brainstorm what could go wrong. And then a separate day, not during that meeting, a separate day, going back and being like, okay, well, let's categorize these risks and let's try to decide what we actually want to do with these things. You know, when you do stuff like that, then you start to get richer things. And then one of the biggest ones that we see over and over again is we just don't have diversity of thought on teams. Gender, socioeconomic, race. Without that, it's really hard to make decision making. I'll share another one. Every morning in the White House, there's a senior staff meeting. And the way it works is it's in the Roosevelt Room. There's the Oval Office, and then there's a door that comes out of the Oval Office. There's a hallway, and then it connects to the Roosevelt Room. And so the Oval Office door closes. President starts his day in there. The Roosevelt Room door closes, and the chief of staff brings together the meeting, kicks the day off to order. And you look around that room, at least when I had the opportunity to be there, and it looked like America. I mean, it's like, you know, you got people across every geography, social, economic, you got everybody. And the amount of times where somebody would have something and bring up an idea and somebody would be like, have we thought about this? And be like, huh, no, tell me more. This is the yes and of policy. Is like, help me make this better. Help me make this smarter. And you can only do that when you have enough diversity of people around the table, or you have people around the table who can help you get to the other people, because your table isn't big enough because it's just the number of people involved. The more you can do that, the more effective you're gonna stop some of those issues in the place.
Olin, I think you're up next.
Oh, you're all scratchy for me.
To do.
Oh no.
You're wearing a Julia shirt. I'm a big fan of Julia.
Oh, he's one right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah, go for it.
yes.
It's a little bit aligned to what you were saying, but in a different way. Like as I understand, like you're talking about the diversity in the ideas of what people might come up with, but there's also like the lack of diversity in the data we have. And I was wondering, how can we manage the trade-off of the lack that we have to run ethical RCTs in the real world in order to make public policies, like to have a real impact, because you cannot play with people's lives. Like, I don't know if you saw this Nairobi RCT that was awful, and those are the things that we should avoid. And how can we contrast this in the real world? Like we don't have the whole complete data, and we don't have the causality of things that can get into the things that we want to provide, but we cannot. But we also cannot run RCTs. So how can we do that?
This is another great question. Thanks. So a lot of times we look at data and we're like, look, the data doesn't have a certain population, or it's biased in some way. And we forget to ask what's behind that. And a lot of times it's institutional lack of trust. You know, you look at certain population and you say, why aren't they represented? And One of the biggest ones is if you look in medical data, guess which population isn't in medical data? Women. How is it women aren't in medical data? Well, let's think about where medical centers are. They're generally in upper middle class environments. So what do those correlate with? Well, predominantly Anglo white neighborhoods. As you look at that, you kind of say, well, who gets the medical care? It's middle-aged white men. Who advocates for their care? Women. Who advocates for women's care? No one. So as you think about clinical trials and all this stuff, there's a bias function. So you don't see other races. You also don't see women in the data set. And so part of this is there's systems behind the data that are preventing the data capture. You see this also in other ways are endemic because of a distrust. The Black population in the United States, predominantly with biomedical, because of Henrietta Lacks, Tuskegee, as well as policies that are just in the hospitals that are just racially unjust. These mean that the Black population doesn't trust the healthcare system like many of us might want to believe that's true. So they don't want to be in those data sets because they opt out. There's a lot happening in COVID that we don't get to see because it's with migrant communities that are they're being prosecuted by DHS and ICE. So we don't even know the true aspect and impact of COVID. What I have found in these processes is it's very easy to get frustrated with the data set. And instead what we have to ask is there a way to bridge a better relationship to get that data? And a lot of times it means that I'm not the one working on the data. I'm finding another party to do this, another group who is actually of that community, who are helping put these things together. One of the things that we did for the Precision Medicine Initiative that was very clear-cut guidance directly by President Obama was that he wanted explicitly people who were going to be impacted by the research to be at the table designing the process, not just talking about it, not just sort of, groups advocating for them, actual people. And when you had that, and they were talking about what the impacts are for their community, it really changed the whole dynamic of how you might approach it. I mean, massively. And so the problem, and it's very frustrating for us as data people who would like to want to see a good data set, we actually have to kind of go back, we'll go one step further and ask ourselves, how can we construct a data set together? You have to make it a we with the population. Otherwise, what I'm finding in a lot of these things is you're not going to be able to capture it. Now, you might be able to get some of it through proxies, but the proxies also can sow distrust if not done correctly. You can actually create much more harm with the group. There's also a question, I think, in there about people who don't act in good faith. And you're absolutely right. There are bad actors out there. And we need actually stronger regulation to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about that? Because right now, it's we don't have recourse. We don't have recourse when somebody does something wrong or does something with data that might harm people. And we need to figure out those aspects. And unfortunately, Congress has not shown any desire to act on these. And I don't expect Congress to actually take any action anytime soon. This includes the Federal Trade Commission's report on data brokers and other groups as well.
Oh, great. So there's a question in the chat that's asking about what the biggest risks in the market are for future data scientists. What are some skills that you think that young data scientists should focus on, given that self-driven AI will only improve and reduce technical skills required?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the first part of this is question of commoditization of skills. So let's kind of take commoditization of skills head on. What can't you commoditize? It's not about data science skills. It's about your ability to think and be creative. It's your ability to have curiosity. Like the curiosity is the biggest thing. The best thing, you know, like the test that I give everyone to see if they're going to be a good data scientist, it's not rocket science. I just say, like, imagine you have all of the data in LinkedIn or all the data in Devoted Health. Tell me what you want to do. And you'd be shocked at how many people are like, I don't know. The people who are good are like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? What about this and this? And then after like 5 minutes, you're like, okay, we're good. We're good. Checkbox. You've got curiosity. You've got passion. Like, that's what you need. You got to develop that other thing. And that ability to say, what if I grab this and grab this together? How do I work in ambiguity? How do I work in messiness, not a clean construct? But those things are the things that you should really go after right now. The skills and everything else, they come with that. As you were working on these problems, I remember Chris and I used to talk about this all the time. Like, we weren't studying numerical recipes because we were like, gee, let's have fun and read through numerical recipes, right? Like, people don't go learn grammar generally because they're just like, yeah, let's go learn about sentence structure. You learn it because you're trying to write. Like, let the problem motivate your learning. It'll carry you further. It'll carry you so much further. And this gets to one of the biggest things is the biggest mistake I see with data scientists is they try to learn to work alone. I couldn't imagine when we were students, the idea of working alone. That was just horrifying to me. We were a team. Like, whose project was leading, who, like, we're just trying to work together and learn. And it's that adage of, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's so true. And so here's the question, which I point out to people. Everyone is so focused on the job, getting a job. People are not focused on, is that a good choice? And what do people optimize for? They optimize for salary. Optimize for learning. Optimize for learning. When you, instead of focusing on, well, here's a way to say it. Every year of learning is a year of life. Let's call that the base measure, 1x. 1 year for 1 year. Some jobs, some experiences are half x. For every 1 year, you get half the learning. It's like watching an episode of The Office. Maybe that's a quarter x. You know? Then there's jobs that are 2x, 3x, 5x, 7x, 10x. So 10x jobs, you can't survive. Like, one, most of you aren't good enough to do a 10x job because you have to have done, you have to kind of ladder up. Like, no one goes and just runs a marathon, right? The second part of it is most 10x jobs, you can't stay at 10x for that long. Your body's not designed for it. Like, White House jobs, average tenure of a White House role, about 1.5 years before people physically and mentally burn out. It's so hard. You just can't, you're not getting enough sleep, all those different things. 10x for me, even at like LinkedIn in the IPO time period, you're getting like 3-4 hours of sleep. I had like pneumonia. Like, it's bad for you. You shouldn't be doing it necessarily. So where's your sweet spot? Right now, you are probably learning somewhere between 3x and 5x, maybe 7x in college, because you have one job, to learn. Your whole job is to learn. So imagine you kept that up in your next job. You were at 3x and 7x pace. And you were around people who taught you at the same rate of learning, where every quarter, equivalent of every semester, you were just like, whoa, I can't believe I was that stupid. Huh. Like, how did I not know these things? Like, you're just like, wow. And the only way to do that is to be around people who push you that way. Think about if you were around the table of people at the early PayPal table. Forget about the ethics, because there's a whole bunch of stuff in there and views that we should not fully dismiss, or should not dismiss at all. But think of just about the companies and the learning, just purely from a corporate perspective. Out of that LinkedIn, that PayPal table came Yelp, YouTube, LinkedIn, SolarCity, Tesla, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. Just because people are around that table. People go pay for an MBA. What if you just took a job with a 20% pay cut and you're around people like that? I'm not saying don't get paid less. I'm just saying, what happens if you chose the job rather than? So rather than choosing and hyper optimizing your skills for this job, hyper optimize for the job after this job. Like ask yourself, what trajectory do you need to point yourself on to get there? So if you're a graduate student, why are you pointing your job to get a PhD? Your job is to position yourself to go get a professorship. Like all the training you should be doing, like how do you learn to write a grant? How do you learn how to put a team together? All of that is what you should be learning, not just that part about being an academic. If you're trying to be a software developer, awesome. Like let's ask the question of how do you end up being the job after that? Maybe it's a VP of engineering, maybe it's something more, maybe it's a tech lead. You start asking those kind of questions, you're going to be around a far better caliber team and you're gonna pick up skills that cannot be commoditized. And that's the biggest thing. It's not about the thing. It's not like a textbook where there's chapter 1, check, 2, check, check, check. It's not like that. It's those other skills that are the ones that make you more valuable than anything else, because everyone else has already got those check boxes too. Make yourself multidimensional in terms of your ability to be attractive to people, because you solve problems faster, more effectively, and you're just fun to be around. That's the other thing. It's just, you're a better teammate.
Well, speaking of multidimensionality, in the interest of time, I'll combine the next two questions that popped up in the chat because I think they're related. Alexander Daniels was wondering, as technology and data grow, so does, it seems, fallacious framing of data. How can data scientists actively combat that? What fundamental set of truths should be embedded in all of our correspondence presentation to the general public? I think it's related to Jane Adams' question about high dimensional data, because it's harder to do clean communication around and probably easier to do fallacious framing. So what strategies have you seen most helpful in practice for communicating with these data?
Yeah, good. These are fantastic. So this is going to be hard, right? Like nowhere better than climate change. Our approach to convince people about something is to throw more data at them, to give them one more chart, to tell them how they're stupid that they can't see this. And you're seeing the same framing happen around COVID, by the way. You could create all the infographics you want around a mask and people are like, just one more graph, whatever. We have to find something new. We have to find something different in the way we communicate, because our approach is not working. It's just not. There's too much ability to manipulate. There's too much ability for people to have a gap because they see us as, oh, you're that academic talking to me. You're this, you're coming from a holier than thou approach. So we're running into a problem that we all need to collectively start figuring out how to engage. Some of the things I think on the scientific communications is we got to return back to some of the really great science communicators like Alan Alda and others, which is you have to return back to the art of storytelling. Just the art of storytelling. And part of that, more importantly than anything else, is not to start approaching them with, let me tell you why my research is important, but to start with, why don't you tell me what your problems are? Like, what happens if instead of us trying to throw stats at everyone, we try to have everyone else say, you know what, why don't you tell me what your problem is? And then let me see if I can add value with my solution. Or maybe it's something like, let me tell you why I'm passionate about this problem. Not why you should care about my problem. Why do I care about this problem? And see if they'll get on board. Like a lot of this comes down to, I think we have taken the humanities out of our training. And when you start to put that back in and we find this different engagement, we're going to find things that are differently. It's not to take away from the question of how do we get people to have a basic level of understanding statistics or all that. That's I do not want to diminish that at all. That's so important. Questions of uncertainty, caveats, bias, all this stuff in data. And we don't know. The honest, intellectually honest answer around some of these things is we don't know how to communicate these as effectively as I think we want. What we do know is we have a population and a society that is becoming increasingly polarized. And in that polarization, do we pick a side or do we act as a bridge? And best scientists, the best communicators, the people who are most beloved and who have the highest level of trust are those that are willing to bridge that divide. And I won't say it's an easy thing. It's actually a very hard thing. You know, Francis Collins, who heads up the National Institute of Health, led the Human Genome Project, devout Christian, trying to bridge the divide that is there around stem cells, fetal cells usage. And he gets attacked from both sides, but he's trying to be a good, solid bridge and conduit. And if we don't have more people who are going to act in that layer and bridge, we're not going to be able to do it. Some of the most powerful things that I have learned in my time working on science projects or other things, especially with data, is to go sit down with the people where the data is coming from. And you know, if any of you have heard me talk on anything else or work on anything, the thing that I take away the most is the data points have names. You know, we forget who their names are. We don't remember their stories. And you know, there's 181,000 people dead just in the United States alone due to COVID. Those are names. Those are incredibly important people. They're not just some story that we see of a byline and some paper that just says, oh, they went to a wedding. Whoops, woe's me. That's not, we shouldn't, we gotta do more. We gotta reach harder to know their names, to remember their names, their number of faces, to keep who they are close to us. Without that, if we don't do that, what I have found is that you become desensitized. You lose the touch and the feel of the data. And you allow things to creep in where suddenly you wish I should have seen that happen. Can't believe we got caught off guard by that. Don't put the right protections in place. You don't try to ensure that there's not bias. And I'll just be very concrete. The mission of Devoted Health right now is to build a healthcare system that takes care of every member like they were family. The reason we have that mission statement is because when you're working with any of our data or anybody else's in the company, you are actually working on data of people's family members who are in the company. And it changes your whole perspective. It's a little bit of a thing that helps you kind of remember are you doing enough? Are we doing enough to help them? And a lot of this, honestly, is outside our control as scientists, because we get a data science, we get a data set, we get something, and we have to work how to get upstream to work on that, to make it a broader, more collective thing. We do that, we'll see a different set of results, I think. Actually, I fundamentally believe it. I fundamentally believe it. And that's why we say data science is a team sport.
Thank you so much, DJ. I feel like this discussion could go on for hours, but we're hitting the top of the hour. This was a great discussion. So I wanted to thank you, and I'll let Chris sort of close us out for the evening.
Yeah, this has been spectacular, DJ. I think, you know, there's so much that we agree with in what you've told us about today, and a lot of thought-provoking ideas. I was going to bring up the saying over your left shoulder and what it means about the culture that you bring with you, the move purposely and fix things. He's got a blog post about that too. So it's just been a real treat. So everybody, you can unmute if you want for a second to give DJ a round of applause, and thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to great things. So thanks again.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone. Be well.
Bye, DJ.
Thank you.